I think one of the big disconnects is people think that, like, how do we define a prenup? Most people think that a prenup is writing out your divorce decree before you're married. And a lot of people, the general public, don't know that a prenup is defining your financial relationship with your spouse, both during marriage and, yes, if necessary, after marriage. Because there's so many surprises with it. And it just struck me, litigating divorce cases, that so many of the things that broke couples apart in the first place, as well as what made the divorce cases themselves so messy and so difficult, were very predictable, and my theory was also preventable. The default prenup, which is what your state laws say to do, which is basically everything's up for grabs. It's a free-for-all, and judges can make a decision based on whether they don't like you or who they thought was the more moral person during the marriage, or who earned whatever a judge's kind of preconceptions in terms of who deserves more of the assets. That's what determines the division of assets when couples get divorced, versus couples deciding on their own at the beginning of their marriage, when they love each other, how to categorize these kinds of things.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. We're here this week with a financial topic that isn't often talked about, right, Jackie?
Yeah, we are super excited because we got to meet him in person, and he's got some cool stuff.
All right, well, we're going to have Aaron Thomas on today. He's a lawyer who does prenups, and prenups have taboo surrounded about them. But let's introduce him first, Jackie, okay?
Yeah, so it's June, and one of the things that a lot of us think about is June brides and weddings and nuptials. But do you know what you're committing to when you're exchanging wedding vows? I mean, legally speaking, that is. Well, our guest today, Aaron Thomas, is going to tell us all about it in ways you probably haven't heard before. He explains how a proper prenup can not only protect, but improve your relationship. He's an attorney and founder of Prenups.com and the author of the book, The Prenup Prescription. He has represented everyone from athletes and superstars to business professionals and stay-at-home parents. After helping hundreds of clients secure favorable settlements as a divorce attorney, he realized he'd rather help clients build healthy, successful marriages founded on transparency and communication through loving and fair pre and post-nups. Geez, Aaron, where were you before I got divorced? And yes, he and his wife have their own prenup, and so he practices what he preaches. So Aaron Thomas was one of the main stage speakers at Economy this year, and Bill and I got to meet him in Cincinnati, and it just gave us a really good taste for how effective his approach reframes the sometimes dreaded prenups. So we knew we had to get him on the show to talk more about it and to share it with our audience. So Aaron, welcome to Catching Up to FI.
Thank you so much for having me, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, we are excited to have you too. And as a lawyer, you didn't start doing prenups. Take us through your legal journey, because how on earth did you make the jump from what you were doing before in marriages breaking up, and even prior to that, through divorce, to help prevent it?
Yeah, I really stumbled into family law altogether. I, shocker, was not a kid that said, hey, I want to be a divorce lawyer when I grow up. When people ask you in elementary school what you want to do, I got recruited into the area of law because I had experience trying cases, and I was in criminal law, and the only thing that goes to court almost as much as criminal law is divorce cases. And so I got recruited into doing divorce work. I didn't know the first thing about it. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I needed to pay my student loans off. And I was shocked. I mean, first year into family law, I was shocked at how difficult divorce was, about how unpredictable the outcomes of divorce cases were. And it's not like anybody thinks that divorce is easy, certainly, but whatever you have in your mind, if you have not been through particularly a messy divorce, whatever you have in your mind about how difficult it is or how hard it is tougher than that. It's worse than what people expect, particularly because there's so many surprises with it. And it just struck me litigating divorce cases that so many of the things that broke couples apart in the first place, as well as what made the divorce cases themselves so messy and so difficult, were very predictable. And my theory was also preventable.
Well, it's interesting because we need to know, in order to understand prenups, what the background history of marital and divorce law. There are anachronisms here. And why should we care? How is marriage different now from years gone by?
Yeah. I mean, the laws pertaining to marriage and divorce were by and large written 100, 150 years ago. And those laws are based on a concept of marriage that comes from English common law that is hundreds of years old. And so the law surrounding marriage really assume that it's a relationship from a different time when, we all have this idea of we get married and it's two people becoming one, this union of two people becoming one. And it sounds like this very romantic thing. You think about this new union is half me and half you. And the reality is that getting married historically has meant that the wife or the woman ceases to exist as a legal entity. For the vast majority of the history of marriage, married women couldn't own property and didn't have rights to vote. And so this idea that two people become one was really the woman comes under the man's wing, under his name, takes his last name, and the man makes all of the decisions. It's particularly when it comes to the marriage, but certainly when it comes to the finances as well. And I don't know how it works in your household, but most modern marriages, I certainly don't have 100% of the decision-making authority when it comes to the finances in my household. And most modern relationships aren't built on that. And so there's been a change in terms of what marriage looks like from 100, 150 years ago to today. And then there's been a second shift over the past, I would say 50 to 60 years. And I always like to compare kind of my relationship or our generation to my parents' generation. My parents got married in the 1960s, and marriages back then looked very different than they do today. The average couple getting married in the 1960s was each spouse was 21. And their financial lives were very simple. It was common for them to have maybe one bank account between the two of them. Credit cards didn't even really exist. They were seen as a tool for only the super wealthy. 401ks hadn't been invented yet. Your pension hadn't kicked in yet at age 21. That couple was likely to have no interest in a business, no equity in a property. I mean, they really were a blank slate when joining their financial lives. And my parents, they got to build all of their financial habits, their financial lives together as a couple. They got married in their early 20s, like many people did. Today, it is very common for people to get married. The average age of a first marriage is 30, and people often get married much later than that. And even for a couple that gets married only at age 30, their financial lives are way more complex. I mean, that couple is likely to have 4 or 5 bank accounts each, 3 to 4 credit cards each, student loans, not unusual for them to be in 6 figures today. They've got credit cards. Each spouse has a car. They may have business interest, brokerage accounts, car loans. They may have equity in a house. And so the couple in the 1960s getting married, if you compare them to a business, they're a startup. They're a startup business complete from scratch. And the couple getting married today, it is a corporate merger in terms of complexity. And no one would ever enter into that relationship without some real, transparent conversations and work and coming together and not on assumptions, but real understandings as to what are we doing when we join our financial lives together here. But the way that we combine our finances in marriage has not caught up. It hasn't kept up to pace with the changes in marriage since the 1960s. And the consequences of not doing that kind of consciously can be disastrous. That's, I think, a big part of the divorce rates being what we see them being today.
Ooh, startups and mergers. That's romantic. So, how on earth do you make the shift? Yeah, I'm divorced, so full disclosure. Bill is happily married. I'm happily divorced. So, gosh, it's got to be a big shift to now. I mean, the history that you just explained makes so much sense. The system is now dated because most marriages and relationships aren't like they were 100 years ago. So, gosh, how do you even make that shift to turn it into something that is actually going to help your relationship? Because we see stuff on TV where prenups isn't exactly the most positive thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. You cannot have a conversation about prenups without addressing some of the stigma surrounding them. I mean, you hear the word prenup, and what a lot of people have a very visceral reaction just to hearing the word. I mean, what comes to mind when you think about a prenup? For a lot of us, it's myself included. Before I started doing this type of work, I think about, and some old guy, maybe an oil baron, trying to keep his money away from some young gold digger. People my generation, I think about Anna Nicole Smith. I may be dating myself for anybody who's younger than me, but you think about planning your divorce before your marriage even starts, right? That's what comes to mind when people think about a prenup. You don't think about it being what I think it should be looked at, which is a partnership plan for your marriage. And I think one of the big disconnects is people think that, like, how do we define a prenup? Most people think that a prenup is writing out your divorce decree before you're married. And a lot of people, the general public, don't know that a prenup is defining your financial relationship with your spouse both during marriage and, yes, if necessary, after marriage. And I think that, when you think about it that way, a lot of people are not opposed to the idea of getting more intentional with how do you manage your money during your marriage itself, right? It is the planning for the divorce part that is more distasteful. But if we put more of the emphasis on how are you going to merge your finances, what kinds of expectations does each spouse have coming into the marriage in terms of what their financial relationship is going to look like, then it becomes a little bit easier to see how it is going to benefit your relationship during the marriage itself.
I thought marriage was all about Romeo and Juliet and just a love story. I mean, how else can Romeo and Juliet be seen?
Yeah, I mean, you've been married for a long time. What percentage of your marriage is actually singing a song from a balcony and, dropping rose petals on the floor? There are lots of, I think most of us, if we're being honest, there are lots of just day-to-day, work. As part of any successful marriage or any successful relationship is work, uncomfortable conversations, sometimes resolving differences. It's no different when thinking about how you're going to treat your finances during a marriage. I mean, case in point, finances are the number one or very close to the top of things that married couples argue about. And so if we know that that's the case, it would seem to behoove all of us who are in relationships to pay more attention to what our financial relationship looks like. And even just talking about financial relationships, like, I think some people listening to this are thinking, I have an emotional relationship, you have a physical relationship with your spouse. And a lot of people, it's not even on their radar that there is such a thing as a financial relationship with your spouse. But we are all navigating these kinds of topics in our marriages. How much access do each of us have to money? What kinds of financial decisions do each of us get to make without having to confer with each other? Is there a level of financial decisions that we have to confer with our spouse before we make those decisions? And I think what a lot of people find out is our financial relationship is based 100% on assumptions rather than something that we've sat down and intentionally come up with a set of rules for how we're going to manage finances in our relationship, whether that's savings rates, where does the money go, where are our paychecks deposited, what are we each doing in terms of retirement, what bank accounts do we all have access to, what information do we have access to in our relationships. And so there's a lot of, I think, low-hanging fruit in terms of improving our relationship by improving our financial communication in our marriages.
Yeah. So I guess I think a lot about, okay, so you're mentioning financial stuff. So I'm thinking about a lot of the other things that could be included in a prenup. So you've done a lot of these. What types of things are typically included in a prenup? Like, is there infidelity stuff in there? Is there stuff about the kids? Is there working with a therapist or a psychologist? Like, run us through that a little bit. What is inside the prenup?
Yeah. Great question. So I like to split up kind of the topics of a prenup into three categories. I think of like before marriage, during marriage, and then you could call it after marriage. Sometimes I call it the contingency plans to use a euphemism. But so before marriage, coming into marriage, where are you and your spouse financially? And so one of the interesting things is that, and this is true in all 50 states in the US, is for a prenup to be enforceable, each spouse has to disclose all of their assets and debts with each other. And we typically do that by having each spouse prepare a net worth statement where they list out all of their assets, all their liabilities. We add it all up. You disclose your income. And for a lot of couples, even just that one step is revelatory because you don't typically slap down your net worth statement on your first date. It's not first date conversation. It's not third date conversation. We're trying to put our best foot forward. I'm paying for dates, maybe putting that on the credit card, some of us. And what I found is a lot of couples, because there's never a comfortable time to get that kind of transparent and granular with your finances, for a lot of people, it doesn't happen even into the marriage. And so looking at your finances in black and white, for a lot of people, when they're preparing their prenup, that's the first time that they've ever actually seen their spouse's or their fiance's net worth, that they've seen how much debt that their spouse has, or that they've had to disclose what they have on their side of the ledger. And a lot of us have some shame surrounding that. All of us want to be, especially catching up community, we all want to be further along than we already are. So everybody's already has a little bit of tension when it comes to what's on their balance sheet. But disclosing that information at the beginning of the marriage is helpful in that, number one, it's automatically going to force some conversations. You have to make it a no judgment zone, but how did you get to where you are? Do you pay off your credit cards monthly? Do you not believe in having credit cards at all? Or are you somebody that actually carries debt on your credit cards? How much do you have in student loans? How much do you have in savings? Are you aggressively maxing out your 401k and your retirement options? Or are you kind of saving whatever happens to be left over in the checking account at the end of every month? And those kinds of conversations go a long way towards trying to get couples on the same page in terms of what are our financial habits going to be during our relationship itself, which is kind of step two. How are we going to treat our finances during the marriage? And so first question is, how do we set up our bank accounts? And again, for our parents' generation, you have one joint bank account, all the money goes in there, all the expenses come out of there. And today's day and age, virtually every single person that gets married already has multiple bank accounts. And they may open up a joint bank account, but people aren't typically closing up their separate bank accounts either. So then that begs the question, are our paychecks going to continue to go in our separate bank accounts and then we transfer money into a joint bank account that pays for our joint expenses? Or are we going to switch our paychecks to go into a joint account and then maybe we get to transfer some money out for our own spending money? And I am a big fan of couples having those kind of three buckets. I call them money buckets, those three separate categories of accounts. So you have a joint account. So you are building a financial life together. You're both contributing to the joint expenses, but you do maintain separate accounts so you can have some money that goes into there so each spouse can do their discretionary spending without feeling like I'm giving up all of my autonomy and control over my personal spending when I get married. And that seems to be like the happy medium. That seems to be like a good balance for a lot of couples is having a joint account, but also having like at least some access to separate money. But that is a real important conversation for couples to have. I mean, in my divorce work, you would be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't be shocked, how many couples had situations where one spouse's paycheck is going into a joint account and the other spouse's paycheck is going into a separate account. And so there's mismatched visibility or there's mismatched access to money. And so just solving a couple of those types of issues on like the front end of a marriage can work wonders for a couple's financial relationship before we ever talk about the possibility of the D word of divorce, right?
Hey, Catching Up to Fi audience. This is Bill Young telling you that we have some great sponsors here on our show these days. Jeremy Schneider, who's been on the show and is the founder of Personal Finance Club, has created a couple of great courses that he is giving to our audience at a $30 discount. Click on the link in the show notes to get this deal, and you can have the course How to Money Like a Millionaire, which normally is $99, but you can get it for $69 using the code CUTOFI if you click on the link in our show notes. The other course that he does is called Build Wealth by Investing in Index Funds. And again, this course is only $99 normally, and it's such a great value already, but you can get $30 off and pay $69 for this course as well. Now, why not take them both? Buy his Ultimate Personal Finance Bundle, which again is normally $149, but you get $30 off the bundle if you use the code CUTOFI. Go to the show notes and find the link for these courses and get started on your personal finance journey. Yeah, actually, my wife and I are both 1099 and self-employed people, and we each have a separate business account. Our paychecks go into there, and then we have a joint account where we do some joint expenses. But we also divvy up expenses between each account because it helps us with our Schedule C and all the deductible business expenses. So for accounting purposes, the 3 buckets works really well for us. So we're getting something right.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing is a lot of people find out that they're doing parts of this already kind of like naturally, but for other couples who maybe they're unsure or maybe they're having some kind of tension in these conversations, to see that there is a pathway to do this intentionally, or what a lot of couples do is they figure it out by trial and error over the course of 10, 15, 20 years versus, okay, let's take an intentional approach and sit down and talk about what is going to work best for us. How do we maintain our own autonomy, but do things that are going to benefit us from a tax perspective, benefit us from a transparency perspective, or what a lot of couples have issues with is if your paychecks are going into separate accounts and you're contributing to a joint account, what proportions do you contribute to that joint account so you don't end up in a situation where one spouse feels like they're living on the poverty line and the other spouse feels like is living high on the hog, and there can be resentment between the spouses just based on kind of like this unequal access to money.
Wow. All of that is just so enlightening, and it does kind of reframe how you think about a prenup, especially all the stuff that you're thinking about while you're married and setting those guidelines. I definitely didn't do that. And like I said, I'm divorced and I didn't do any of that stuff. Not that it was the main reason why I got divorced, but I think some of those things would have been extremely helpful to do while we were married. And like you said, it just helps sort of initiate so many other conversations that need to be had anyway. So yeah, that's pretty interesting, and I feel like it's kind of nice the way you had it laid out in the book. So yeah, and Bill's our married guy, so go ahead, Bill.
It sounds like marital therapy, premarital therapy,
Yeah.
airing out all the dirty laundry financially so that everybody goes in with eyes wide open. You mentioned also a third part, the post-marriage part of prenups. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do have to touch on what you just said about it being like kind of like this premarital therapy, because that was my observation as well. My wife and I, we did kind of the standard premarital counseling, and I did notice that there was no conversation really about finances. And I think a lot of like the traditional marriage or premarital counselors are not equipped or maybe don't feel comfortable telling people how to manage their finances in their relationship. I mean, in my counseling session, my wife and I, we had to like fill out an entire spreadsheet about what were our preferences for inside the bedroom. I mean, it got very detailed on that, but something so fundamental to the relationship in terms of finances was never addressed. And so I think that a lot of couples do kind of look at this as financial therapy. And certainly there is like the end of the marriage, but before I go on there, that just popped in my mind. The reason that a lot of this became part of my approach to drafting prenups was it was when I was getting married myself, and my wife and I were trying to figure out how do we avoid a lot of the pitfalls that I saw my clients go through over the years. My wife was previously married, so she's been through a divorce herself. She certainly didn't want to go through another one herself. And so one of the things that we decided to put in our agreement that has turned out to be super popular with our clients now is talking about counseling. And what I saw in my divorce work is when one spouse would want to go to counseling, the other spouse wasn't interested, and that spouse would come around to the idea of counseling, and the first spouse had given up on the idea of it. And we said we never wanted that to be us. And so we put it in our agreement that if either one of us wanted to go to counseling, either one of us could trigger this provision, and we have to go to 3 counseling sessions that year, or like within the next following 3 months. And that has just allowed us the ability to get a tune-up on our relationship and not wait until our relationship's on death's door. If your relationship is on like a scale of 1 to 10, our thought is if we get to a 7, let's try to get back to a 9. Let's not wait till we're at a 2 and you go to the counselor and the counselor is like, there's nothing I can do. The relationship has no legs left. There's no basis for you to rebuild it. And putting kinds of those preventative measures into the agreement helps couples have an out. They have a safety valve that they can pull before the relationship is on death's door. But to answer your question, in terms of the end of the marriage, what is the contingency plan there? A lot of it goes back to how couples categorize their assets coming in. And what most people like to do is what I call a title-based system, where if you title something in my name, it belongs to me. If something's in your name, it belongs to you. And if we put it in joint names, it belongs to the two of us. And that way, if there's ever a split, I keep what's in my name, you keep what's your name, and we split what we put in joint names 50-50, rather than what I call the default prenup, which is what your state laws say to do, which is basically everything's up for grabs. It's a free-for-all. And judges can make a decision based on whether they don't like you or who they thought was the more moral person during the marriage, or who earned whatever a judge's kind of preconceptions in terms of who deserves more of the assets. That's what determines the division of assets when couples get divorced versus couples deciding on their own at the beginning of their marriage, when they love each other, how to categorize these kinds of things so that both of them know exactly where they stand during the marriage, and if there is a divorce, that both of them have a very clear way to split up their assets and their debts that doesn't require a year and a half and tens of thousands of dollars spent on divorce litigation. And so it's really about kind of having a system for defining what's mine, what's yours, and what's ours. And for a lot of couples, they may just decide everything is ours. Everything is going in the ours bucket, no matter whose name it's in, and we're going to split everything 50-50, no questions asked. We're not going to leave it up to a judge to decide who gets 60 and who gets 40. We're going to do 50-50 no matter what. And a lot of couples say, all right, we're going to put most of our things 50-50, our house, our checking, our savings, our brokerage, but we'll keep our own retirement accounts, because we each had some coming into the marriage, and it's just easier for us to keep. And we have different investment strategies or risk tolerance, and so maybe we'll keep that separate. Or maybe it's just your cars are kept separate and everything else is in the joint pot. But at least couples are making that decision intentionally rather than leaving it up for a debate at a time when they can't stand each other, and coming to an agreement can be extraordinarily difficult, to put it lightly.
Yeah, what was fascinating in your book was even dogs are a part of prenups. We all have kids that we need to figure out, but people fight over the damn dog.
Yeah, Prenups is a term I have heard used in terms of putting. And now, believe it or not, there are some states who, like California, I think Massachusetts, who are now treating pets more like custody, where the dog can travel back and forth between the fur mom and the fur dad's house after a divorce. But a lot of people know coming in, if this is my dog, this is my dog. The last thing I want is for there to be a debate and let's go spend money on lawyers in a courtroom to fight over who keeps Fido. So, but it really does go to show that a prenup is so much more than just kind of like planning a divorce. It's a contract like any other contract, and you can put in there pretty much whatever you want to put in there that doesn't violate the law. And you can't put anything in a prenup dealing with custody or with child support. But in terms of your financial relationship and what the process might look like if your relationship is on the rocks, you are really only limited by your imagination. And my approach is you should, one, do things that take these kinds of issues out of the assumption realm and put it into the intentionality realm, both in terms of like what's mine, what's yours, what's ours, but also, are we going to go to counseling? Are we going to have limits on how much each of us can spend from the joint account? before the other one gets upset. Our rule in my relationship is neither my wife nor I can spend over $500 from the joint account, from any joint account, without it being a discussion ahead of time. Turns out my wife really doesn't like it if I make a huge purchase from the joint account without checking with her first. And by having like some kind of threshold like that, we're able to avoid arguments over expenses coming out. We just have this mutual respect where, in our reality, our agreement says $500, but in our practice, we now really discuss anything over like $200, $250, just because we have ingrained it into our relationship to have discussions about things that impact the other spouse. And I hope I'm not naive in believing that that kind of approach to marriage bleeds over into the other parts of your relationship besides just the finances, that it's just our rule we're going to communicate, we're going to discuss things that impact the other person. And we have kind of an unspoken rule in my house now that we can't purchase any groceries from the Instacart until we give the other spouse an opportunity to put some of their grocery items into the cart, just because that's now the culture of our marriage. But yeah, that is, I think, kind of the overall approach to getting intentional about your relationship and doing it through a contract.
Yeah. So, Aaron, even if you do the contract, you obviously do custom ones. Are there like do-it-yourself prenups or like a template, like wills? It'll take you through like this little wizard or whatever. Do they have those types of prenups too?
Yes, those kinds of things exist. I'm terrified of those because, I think that what is dangerous is that a lot of people don't know what they don't know. And something like a prenup, you get one chance really to do it right, and you don't know whether it's going to hold up or how it's going to serve your relationship until a lot of times at the very end of a relationship. And so I think that marriage is the most important financial decision that anyone ever makes in their life. I know that people do not like to think about marriage as being a financial decision because certainly it's not just a financial decision, right? It is a romantic decision. It is a life partner decision. It's starting a family with somebody decision. For some people, it is a spiritual decision as well, right? But it can be all of those things and also be the biggest financial decision that you ever make in your life. And I think that it deserves the same kind of cautious and careful and intentional approach that we would all take in choosing a career, buying a house, an investment strategy for your retirement. The same kind of intentionality that we give all those things, we should give to a marriage, because the success or failure of a marriage can have just a monumental impact on people's finances, particularly when you think about your ability to get to financial independence. Marriage certainly impacts that.
Yeah, after hearing you and all the points that you made, I'm like, I'd be scared to death to do a do-it-yourself one. But I just wanted to mention that because there's so many things I would not have considered that you just mentioned. So yeah, I think that is something where it'd probably be worth the investment.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about this, there's boilerplate prenups, and your Prenup Prescription, which is your book, is distinctly different, as I think you've outlined. And what people don't realize, and you alluded to this before, is everybody has a prenup when they get married, right?
That is 100% correct. Everyone has. If we can define it, a prenup is a set of rules that defines the parameters of your financial relationship with your spouse. And you can choose those rules on your own by writing them into your own customized prenup. Or if you get married without doing that, you are accepting the default rules of the state where you happen to live. And most people would not choose that option. If they were making a knowing decision between those two options, would not choose the state prenup. Why? Because the ultimate authority over the distribution of your financial assets, every penny of your net worth, lies in the hands of a judge. And what you see in a divorce case is a judge sits up there on a bench and may have a few hours to listen to each spouse, sum up 30 years of marriage, and then make a decision on the distribution of your entire net worth. And I don't think that anyone would purposely sign up for that system if they knew that there was an easy option to kind of opt out of that and make that determination on their own. I fundamentally believe that we are best choosing our financial relationship. I don't think that marital finance is a one-size-fits-all type of relationship. And I think that the people who are best equipped to determine the parameters of the financial relationship are the people who are in that relationship itself. And if people look at it as opting out of a government written prenup and choosing their own rules, I think that most people would prefer to choose their own rules. And oh, by the way, it also saves you from the possibility of long public litigation in a courthouse where you are paying attorneys tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've seen people drop 25% or more of their entire net worth on divorce litigation, going through divorce that is completely unnecessary. And I'm saying this as someone who practiced divorce law for many, many years. I financially benefited for a long time from how difficult it is for couples to agree on the division of their marital estates at the end of their relationship when they no longer communicate. And they may resent each other, and they may both believe that they deserve the majority of what's left. And that puts people in just such a horrible position that is totally preventable by opting out of the default prenup and writing your own.
So, Aaron, can these prenups still be contested? Like if you decide to go through a divorce, you got a prenup, and one of the spouses decide to contest it. Can they do that?
Yes, people can and do often contest prenups. So I have a couple thoughts on it. One is, ideally, by doing a prenup that is fair, that is collaborative, and not just this. Certainly there are people who are trying to protect their assets and they dump a prenup that is one-sided on their fiance 1 week before the wedding and say sign it or else after the invitations have already been sent out. And I just think that that is so distasteful, and a big reason why prenups have such a bad reputation is people who do it absolutely the wrong way. But for a couple that comes together and does it collaboratively and they make a prenup that they both agree to, the best kind of prenup is one that neither one wants to get out of, that neither spouse wants to contest at the end of the day. But what we typically do is we say, all right, if you're agreeing to this ahead of time, number one, if you do it correctly, if you have a good lawyer, if both people have the opportunity to talk to their own lawyer prior to signing it, and everything was done correctly in terms of both spouses being honest in disclosing all their assets and debts going into it, it is going to be upheld. It is going to be upheld by the court. And what is typical is there will be a clause in the prenup that says, all right, if you challenge it, if you take this to court and try to get it thrown out and the court finds that it was done correctly, then you got to pay both sides attorney's fees so that there is a penalty. But the idea is we're going to avoid litigation. We're going to avoid spending money on lawyers and going and having our dirty laundry aired out in a public courtroom. Then if you try to drag us back into that, then you're going to pay the penalty for it when the court upholds the prenup. Now, and what that does is if there is truly a reason to have it thrown out, like somebody had a gun held to their head or somebody lied about their finances, then yeah, a court is going to throw out that type of prenup like they would any contract that was based on fraud. But if it was done correctly and honestly, and it's upheld, then the person who is not trying to contest it and get it thrown out doesn't have to pay the lawyer's fees associated with that litigation. So that's another one of the tools that we'll use in those agreements.
So there's a carrot and stick. I didn't know that you could have that clause in a prenup, which I think is great for a disincentive to say, oh no, I agreed to this, but I'm going to go back on my word and I want more. It isn't enough. Like the Kevin Costner divorce, where the prenup was markedly out of skew with regards to net worth and needs for maintenance. And you have to know and what you're signing up for. And I like the idea that you have your own lawyer look at it, because this is foreign language to people, and you got to make sure you understand the language and what you're getting into. So each to have their own lawyer to figure this out and make sure it's an agreement. I mean, it sounds like a pre-divorce, again, like counseling, so that, you are eyes wide open. There is no concern that it's going to be an acrimonious divorce.
You may have heard of a new financial planning platform called Nectarine. It's at hellonectarine.com. And this is put out by our friend Jeremy Schneider, who runs the famous Personal Finance Club. If you're on Instagram, you have seen his sketches, and he is awesome. He is well respected. He knows what he's doing. And one of the big questions that he never had a good answer to was, how do I find a good financial planner that is flat fee advice only? He didn't have an answer. So, you know what he did as an entrepreneur? He created a platform, and that platform is Nectarine, where it's $150 flat fee for a 1 hour session. And this is with vetted advice only planners. Most are CFPs, which stands for Certified Financial Planners, or other credentialed and licensed professionals. That's an important nuance. And again, this is brought to you by Personal Finance Club. I myself, as a nerd, went back to get my certified financial planner credential, and I know how valuable this credential is. And Jeremy wanted to make sure that he was only providing you with the best. So go to hellonectarine.com, and for a flat fee of $150 per hour, you get access to an advice only financial planner. Check it out.
Yeah, yeah. And even beyond that, I mean, you talked about kind of like these incentives to stay out of the courtroom. Often our clients will go far beyond that. So I'll give you an example. My prenup, not only do we have this rule that either one of us can trigger 3 counseling sessions once a year during the marriage itself, if divorce is on the table, if either one of us notifies the other one that we're thinking about dissolving the marriage, then we've got to go to 6 counseling sessions before we're even allowed to move forward. And that will give us another opportunity to either one, try to work on the relationship and at least be able to say that we gave this marriage the absolute best opportunity it had to be salvaged. Or sometimes, even if the marriage is over, that's an opportunity to talk about, all right, how do we co-parent effectively? What can we do so that we're not like taking a bath and selling our property at a low point of the market? Can we do this intentionally so that we protect both of us so it makes the process more orderly? And then even if we get to the end of the counseling, my agreement then has a requirement that we do mediation. So again, before there's any kind of argument or fighting to go to court, we're required to sit down and see what we can resolve on our own. Some people will include mandatory co-parenting counseling, like counseling specifically for the purpose of working out any issues in terms of coming up with a custody plan, or what are the best ways to effectively communicate to the child that the split is happening. And so there is just such a better and more orderly process that can allow people to dissolve their marriages. If the marriage cannot be saved, there's a way to set it up so that you have a better chance of dissolving it without, number one, dumping a ton of money on lawyers, and number two, without slinging a bunch of mud at each other in a courtroom. That then in turn makes it almost impossible to co-parent your kids that you have, and you're going to be those kids' parents for the rest of your lives anyway. And so what I would see a lot of times in my divorce work is people would get into the divorce case and just fight. And then when all the lawyers have been paid and the judge is gone and the courtroom's doors are closed, they still have to go and raise these children together, and they're unable to do so because of all the acrimony that was part of their divorce. And so I'm all about like trying to put yourself in a position where, number one, you are least likely to get divorced, because we've put in all of these kinds of protections and ways to eliminate arguments and minimize conflict during the marriage itself. And then number two, if you do go through a divorce, you have the best chance of it being amicable and not expensive, protecting both of you from like a public fight and a ton of lawyers' fees. And so either way it's kind of a tool to avoid a messy divorce, which, having litigated a bunch of them myself, I can tell you they are best avoided at all costs. 0 stars, do not recommend. And I think that a fair, well-written prenup has the ability to avoid a messy divorce on a couple of different fronts, especially when you do it thoughtfully.
So, Aaron, let's shift to post-nups. How is that different than a prenup, and what are some of the nuances?
Yeah, great question. So a post-nup is pretty much the same thing as a prenup, except it is signed after you are already married. And they come in a few different flavors. Some people, they meant to get a prenup and they got caught up in the wedding planning and they were busy and they didn't get around to it, and now they're married and they come around, they're like, okay, now let's get our things in order, let's do the post-nup. And so they're really signing a prenup a few months too late. And so we do that as a post-nup. And other couples, they have something happen where they realize that a lot of the post-nups that I do are couples where they realize we really do have 3 money buckets. We do have a mine, a yours, and an ours. And they recognize that if anything ever happened, that a court would not respect kind of the informal boundaries that they've drawn in their own relationships, and they want to formalize with the way that they're already living. This is my business, that's your business. This is my retirement, that's your retirement. This is my car, that's your car. Or particularly when people get inheritance, this is property that was passed down in my family, and our intention is to keep that on my side of the family. And I don't want your inheritance, and you don't want a claim to mine. And so they're formalizing kind of like the division of mine, yours, and ours that otherwise may not be respected by a court. And then there are some couples where they have reached some kind of crisis. And a common situation is someone come to me and she says, my husband cheated and he's the breadwinner in our relationship. And I sacrificed the possibility of a lucrative career to stay home and raise our children. And if something happened, if he decided to leave me, where would I be? And we want to formalize, like, what percentage of the assets would I get? Would I get some kind of alimony to bridge the gap from the time when I'm financially dependent to a time when I might be able to work myself back to being financially independent? And they're on good enough terms that they agree to put this kind of thing in place as kind of a tool to save the marriage. They say, look, I want to work on the marriage, but I feel financially vulnerable. And I need the security of knowing exactly where I stand, and that we're not going to go and you can just, what some people do is say, well, I can re-earn the money and she can't. So I'll just spend everything, every last dime of liquid assets on lawyers. We'll just give it to the lawyers, and then I can walk away and have some financial security, whereas like now she has no assets and no career. And I'm saying he and she, but I've seen it go both ways in terms of the gender. And so people say, look, let's get clear about where we stand financially, and then we can go back and work on the other parts of our relationship. But let's clarify exactly where we stand. And sometimes it's a combination of those things or anywhere in between.
So I have a follow-up question here. You told us that you can spend 25% of your net worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars, for example, on a divorce. How much does a prenup cost?
We do prenups for a flat fee of $3,500. I read somewhere recently that the average wedding is now $25,000 to $30,000. Maybe a lot of the people listening to this show are raising an eyebrow at that number, but it's not uncommon. And for a lot of couples, it's a rounding error on the amount that they're going to spend on their marriage. And it is certainly a rounding error on the cost of a divorce. And so that is the flat fee for like 95% of my couples. We also have a kind of a platinum plan that starts at 10 grand, and that's for your very wealthy individuals, your people where you're going to be working with a team of financial advisors and estate planners and all of the person's kind of financial team to come up with a comprehensive agreement that may have to span across different countries where assets lie. But for most people, even people with net worth above $1 million can usually get a very well-written comprehensive prenup for $3,500.
So we have to give Aaron credit for being very clear and transparent on his website with his pricing. I'm in the financial planning world, and that's not always the case. So it is what it is, and we appreciate you being so transparent. So it's very easy to see what you charge, and hopefully others in the industry does something similar. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, we talk about marriage, but these days people don't get married necessarily, and they're domestic partners. Can they do a prenup if you don't have a marriage license? And would that hold up?
Yes, yeah. So very common and becoming even more common today are what we call cohabitation agreements. Some people refer to them as a prenup without the nup, right? And so if couples are going to live with each other, are going to move in, and especially if they're going to purchase a piece of property together, it is a great idea to have a cohabitation agreement for kind of all of the same reasons why it's a good reason to have a prenup, in terms of being able to be intentional about your contributions to the joint expenses that you're going to have, and to be able to have a plan in place for if our relationship is no longer together and we co-own this property, what happens then? How does one of us get our equity out? Who moves out? How do we buy the other one out? How much time do we have to do so? And all of kind of like the being intentional about this partnership plan that you're entering into with someone that you are going to co-own property with. I mean, it's really kind of same concept that applies to a prenup or a post-nup or a cohabitation agreement is really the same as like any other joint investment that you would do somebody. I mean, if you were starting a business with somebody, you are co-owning property, right? You are taking on financial responsibilities that are going to be joint responsibilities. And the example I always use with businesses is like, would you merge your business with another business without a written agreement in place, without like very clear, not assumptions, but very clear rules about who can spend what money from what account and what each person's responsibilities are in this business? No, most of us would not do that, yet we kind of do it in our relationships because it's a special case. But with something like a cohabitation agreement, if you're moving in with somebody, that is the time to have a clear, intentional conversation about what the rules of the road are going to be, because, and this is a little known fact, for couples that buy a piece of real estate together, they buy a house together and they're moving in, when they break up, it can actually be more difficult for someone to get their equity out of that house in a cohabitation situation when they're not married than it would be if they were actually married. Because when couples are actually married, there's like a very clear process in terms of like a divorce case. It's not fun. Most people should try to avoid it with a prenup or a postnup anyway, but there's at least kind of judges know how to treat those situations and are used to splitting up assets in a divorce. But in a cohabitation agreement, it's much more difficult for a judge to say, I have the power to force somebody to sell this house. And so it can be very difficult for someone to get their equity out of the house. And so if you're living together, I think it's a good idea to at least have kind of a clear conversation, if not a written agreement, on who's responsible for what bills and those types of things. But if you are purchasing real estate together, I think it is almost a must that you get a cohabitation agreement.
And what's interesting in a marriage that I didn't know is that, say you own a piece of property going into the marriage and you pay all the mortgage and everything, but you commingle your money. That causes problems, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This might be maybe like the least known but most important thing about couples getting married is when you get married, your very paycheck is considered to be marital property. It is marital income. And so where a lot of people find themselves in trouble is they get married, they've already got a retirement account, they've already got a piece of property, and they say, we'll keep it clean. That's my property, that's my retirement, and I'm only going to contribute to it with my paycheck. I will pay all the expenses associated with this rental property that I have coming into the relationship, and that protects it, and it's just mine, and that does not protect it. Because legally, in the court's eyes, you are taking marital income, money that you earn during the relationship, even if it's just your paycheck in your name only, you're taking marital income, and you're putting it into this premarital asset. And now you've commingled your premarital asset with your marital assets. And the default is, if that couple breaks up, the court says, I'm considering anything that's mixed, we're going to assume it's marital property up for division unless you can prove that it's separate. And it's very difficult to prove how much of an asset that appreciates and depreciates and has money put in here. Some goes to mortgage payments, some goes to renovations, some goes to repairs. You extend that out over 10 years, and it's almost impossible for people to separate out how much of the equity should be considered their premarital property and how much should be considered their postmarital property. And this is why it's so difficult when it comes to marital finances is title determines ownership in every other aspect of our life. If my name is on a bank account, I own it. If my name is not on a bank account, I don't own it. That applies in every area of our life, except when you get married. And we think about commingling money. It's like I'm commingling money between my business or my personal, or I'm commingling my assets with your assets. And commingling in the marriage sense means you're commingling stuff you had prior to the marriage and stuff you have in your own name after the marriage. And that never kind of really triggers, it's not intuitive to think of that as like a warning sign. And so what you find is couples own something prior to marriage, they pay for it with their own earnings in their mind, their own earnings during the marriage, and then they go through a divorce and they are shocked. They're like, I have to split my house. I pay the mortgage every single month throughout the marriage. I have to split my retirement. My spouse didn't save for retirement. I saved during retirement religiously. I maxed out my 401k while they gambled all their money away throughout the marriage. And then when that couple gets divorced, the one who saved has to split all of their retirement with the spouse that didn't save, because the court looks at it as all marital property. And those kind of unintended consequences that I saw in divorce cases are one of the number one reasons that got me to really decide that I wanted to specialize in doing prenups, to kind of educate people on how marital finances work. And if things are going to be joint, it's because you intentionally chose them for them to be joint. If things are going to be separate, it's because you made that intentional choice for them to be separate. And the most devastating thing is for someone to go 20 years into a marriage believing that their financial reality is one thing, and then go through a divorce, and all of their hard work and saving and planning over the course of an entire career is dashed because of something that they didn't realize that they'd signed a contract that they never read. Marriage.
Well, Aaron, we were so glad that you went down this prenup route where you own the website, prenups.com. You wrote this amazing book and you came today to share all of this with us. So can you tell us where people can find the book, where they can find you, and a little bit about who this book is for?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So you can find out information about me, about the business at prenups.com. We're online, all the social media platforms at Prenup Guy. And the book is The Prenup Prescription, Meet the Premarital Contract Designed to Save Your Marriage. It's on Amazon and everywhere else where books are sold. If you just go to the website, prenups.com, we've got links from there out to our social media channels and to be able to buy the book. And you asked me another question.
No, I think we've covered so many things.
Great.
It's been awesome to get through this. I've read your book. My wife wants a post-nup now.
I was going to ask you that, Bill. Are you willing to do a post-nup?
Oh, yeah. Who is the book for? Yeah, who is the book for? Jackie asked. Yeah, so the book is for, and I think a lot of people hear Prenup Prescription, they think you have to be a newlywed or a fiance getting married. And I really wrote this book to be helpful to people who, even if they're single, if they're on the verge of marriage, if they just got married, or I have been fortunate enough to have a lot of feedback from people who've been married 20 years or more and say that they got something out of this that they're going to start implementing in their financial relationships. So hopefully it's for anyone who wants to know a better way to manage money in a relationship.
That's a good thing to close on. Have you gotten a lot of thank yous from couples that come back to you and say, you know what, we are so, whether it went south or not, that said, we are so glad we did this. Thank you for helping us be transparent.
We have gotten such great feedback from couples who have either just read the book or particularly the people who have gotten married to say that it helped them work through issues, that some issues that they knew they had, some issues they didn't know they had, but they feel like they're on much more stable footing in terms of their financial relationship, and they have a plan to move forward in the relationship. They have a plan to resolve difficulties when they come up. And I'm also a client of this kind of prenup myself, and so I can just speak for myself that it has worked wonders for my own relationship. No relationship is perfect, but being able to take all of the most common fights about money off of the table is an improvement in my relationship and has been so for a lot of our clients as well.
Yeah, we talk about that it's so important to have an investor policy statement where you say, this is how I'm going to deal with my finances. This is our financial life. But this is an investor policy statement for merging a business. It's been great to talk to you today. We want to thank you for stopping by, catching up to FI. And we look forward to potentially talking to you again about other topics, financial or otherwise.
I'd love to do it. Thanks so much for having me on, guys. It's been great.
So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. So our social media is Diana Falk, our editor, Fritz Bassard, and show notes are done by Sarah von Sternberg. We love them and they keep us going.
Yeah, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community and we hope you love us back. If you want to support the show and what we're doing, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to virtually say thank you if you get value from our content. The link is in the show notes, or you can head over to our website at catchinguptofy.com and click on the Support the Podcast tab at the top right. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to FI. We would appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review so that our message can reach others.
While we are financial educators and I'm a financial professional that loves to teach, Our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
We'll see you next time on Catching Up to 5.